Hello and welcome to HFMA Talk, the podcast for NHS Finance. I'm Emily Hopkinson, a Policy and Research Manager at the HFMA. I'm joined today by Wendy Wood and Nigel Gloudon, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. One thing which Wendy and Nigel have in common is that they are both part of the first cohort of HFMA Health Inequalities Finance Fellows. This is a group of NHS finance staff who want to learn more about health inequalities and find ways in which finance can help. They're on a year-long development programme which started in November and is run jointly by NHS England and the HFMA. I'm keen to hear from Wendy and Nigel about their experience. What were they hoping to get out of the programme and how are they finding it so far? I think best to kick off with some quick introductions, so I'll start with Wendy. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and what you do?
Thanks, Emily, of course. Yeah, my name's Wendy Wood and I'm a finance business partner in NHS Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin ICB. So I've had this role for a few months now, not very long at all. Been with Shropshire and Telford for about 8 years. Always worked in the NHS since I left school, so a long time in the NHS. So this role now, I'm looking at particularly mental health and individual commissioning, so continuing healthcare, funded nursing care, mental health and learning disabilities and autism. So an interesting role. Never quite had a job quite like this one before, so it was a good step up for me. And I think with being in the Health Inequalities Finance Fellow programme, this role really now is making a difference. So yeah, that's me.
Wonderful, thank you, Wendy. And Nigel, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, good morning. So my name is Nigel Gloudon. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Finance and Performance in Cheshire and Merseyside Integrated Care Board. I'm responsible for Halton Place. It's quite a deprived, one of the more deprived places within Cheshire and Merseyside. Quite an interesting mix of population, and it's got a bridge. It's a river that splits the demography into two, so that makes it even more interesting. My background slightly different to Wendy's. I've spent most of my time in the private sector, so working with consultancy and accounting firms, PwC, Deloitte. But most of that has been targeted towards working with the NHS. So I was there from the start of the NHS Trust authorisation regime, and I've seen it kind of right the way through. I joined the ICB from NHS England. I actually joined NHS England in 2013, and a couple of moves afterwards joined the ICB slightly before it became an ICB, actually. So I was part of the Health and Care Partnership that kind of preceded the ICB and then moved into an ICB role. So I've been in this role effectively since, for the last 2 years or so. And it has and will continue to evolve over time. And we're probably going to see quite a significant evolution happening with the recent change in government. So, I think health inequality sits at the heart of that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nigel. I wonder, what got you interested in health inequalities in the first place?
So for me, Emily, it was probably a year ago now. On every alternate Tuesday, we have a staff huddle where all the ICB staff get together remotely on Teams. And we usually have sort of director updates, etc. Then occasionally we have sort of specific topics where somebody will come in and talk to us about something. And one of the presentations we had about a year ago was on health inequalities. So I guess everyone's heard of health inequalities and you've got your own kind of idea of what that means and how that sort of translates in practice. But I don't think I really I know I didn't understand exactly sort of the extent of it. So in terms of the statistics that were coming out on the presentation, so we had a health inequalities lead who did the presentation, and it was about 6-7 slides, something like that. It wasn't huge, but oh my days, it was just like things that just jumped out at you that you're like, how can that, like, why? I just kept thinking, why is that the case? So for example, in Telford, the life expectancy at birth in the most deprived areas compared to the not so deprived areas for a man is 7.3 years difference. So straight away I'm thinking, well, how can you literally be like live around the corner from somebody else, and yet statistically your life expectancy is 7.3 years less than somebody literally down the road from you. And for females, it was a similar sort of statistic, was 4.9 years. Shropshire, so Telford and Shropshire, interestingly as well, for the ICB where I am, they're quite different demographics. So Shropshire is probably more rural. Telford is rural still, with pockets of little towns, but Shropshire is more, is on a larger scale, so it's a larger area. The population is more rurally isolated than in Telford. Tend to be more little villages rather than Telford. So in Shropshire, that same statistic for males was 4.2 years and females 2.7. So that was the first thing that was said. I was just like, well, why would that be? I've got family who live in Telford. My cousins live in Telford. Aunts and uncles live in Telford. So, I don't live there myself in Shropshire, but I have family that do. And sort of thinking where they live, and I've never thought about what that actually means in terms of, that could be my uncle and my aunt who's not going to live as longer as statistically as somebody else in the area. But why is that? What are they doing differently? What's going on around them socioeconomically? Health, is it down to GP practices, etc.? And it was that really, really stuck out for me. Was the first thing. Then I think an awareness as well of the whole core 20 plus 5. I'd not really come across that before. I'd sort of seen it banded on a poster somewhere, but I didn't really understand what that meant. And it's when you start looking into that, and you haven't got to look into it, obviously we're finance people, don't look into it in a clinical level or anything like that, don't pretend to know, anything about statistics or whatever, but when you start to hear and read about it, it really does, it opens your eyes. It just makes you think, why does that happen? And I think the thing I've found most with this is I feel like a bit of a magpie sometimes going after shiny things. I keep hearing a little statistic, like, well, I want to know about that. I want to know, why is that statistic? And then I think, oh yeah, I'm interested in that. And I'll start to have a few conversations. And then another meeting I'll be in, and it'll be, oh, but this has happened, or this statistic over here. I'm like, oh my days, well, why has that happened? So I want to learn about that. So it's that inquisitive nature. I think this whole program's really opened me up to, I know I'm a nosy person, I'm an inquisitive person anyway, but it's just that.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
It is just that inquisitiveness, if that's a word, to understand why these things are happening for me. So yeah, the first presentation that we had of that really made me just like, that's just, like, I just want to know. I want to learn more. I want to know why. Whether I can actually influence any of that, probably not in the majority, because it's about us doing the right things by our patients. And yes, in a finance we can have certain influences. However, quite aware that it's GPs, it's PCNs, it's trusts, it's other people in the organisation, commissioners, providers, local authorities who have the actual powers to and the roles to make those differences. But yeah, that's sort of that really sparks my nosiness in health inequalities.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Wendy. I find it really interesting that presentation was so impactful for you. Those kind of stats about life expectancy, they're there in Telford, but it's replicated across the whole of the UK.
Absolutely.
And you get, I don't know if you've seen, there's in Manchester and in London and probably in other places, they've set out bus routes or tube maps and put those life expectancies at those points. And it's really impactful to see. And I'm sure there's lots of people like you who look at that and just say, well, why? And what can we do about it? So it has a really big impact. Nigel, how did you get interested in health inequalities?
So just to follow on from your previous comment, we have the snake of life in so it kind of looks like snakes and ladders, but it is the life course of the population of Cheshire and Merseyside. So each place has their own snake. and you can see the kind of the ills and how they impact on various cohorts of the population. So much like Wendy, I guess mine wasn't prompted from a presentation, but much like Wendy, was about inquisitiveness. Obviously, my background of being from a Black and minority ethnic, heritage, health inequalities. It's not, I guess, exclusive to the Black and minority ethnic communities, but it's something that I think has always been part and parcel of the way that that those populations, those communities have tended to live. And in many cases, it had almost become an acceptance that was just what happened. You were predisposed to particular illnesses. You were predisposed to having particularly average length of lives, and it became accepted to some extent, both within the communities and outside of the communities. And I think what really brought it home for me was what happened during COVID, and it really laid bare some of the issue. The subject of inequity actually really came up, both in terms of and it came up in a really kind of emotive way for many people. It was always there in the background. It was there as numbers. And, in some cases, people looked into the numbers like Wendy clearly did. In many cases, the numbers were depersonalized. So they were just numbers. And so people didn't really bother. COVID kind of made those personal. There were people dying. There were people from particular populations dying. And for me, that really kind of resonated, brought it home, more impactful for me, both from a professional perspective, but importantly and kind of sadly from a personal perspective too. And it kind of made sense for me that, if we are finance professionals, a lot of our role is about how we make secure the best use of the resources that we have, and those resources are becoming increasingly constrained. Then addressing issues of health inequalities, I call them the wicked challenges of health inequalities, is something that we should very much be at the forefront of. So I guess I would say it's a combination of, I guess, a personal history, a personal kind of story, and a professional commitment or calling, or whatever you would call, however you would phrase that. And also too, I guess following kind of around that time, I was decided to do a master's in health inequalities. I just kind of liked, it was health economics specifically, but it featured on health inequalities. And it was just something about the injustice, the complex problem that we have to all be part of trying to solve, that just really appealed to me. You fast forward to where we are now, I'm on a podcast talking about it. But it becomes for me, it's a very real, it isn't just the day job. It's part of what I do in my personal time. I've connected to things like health associations. So I choose the charities that I work with, that I'm part of boards of. And it's really about addressing that kind of macro issue of health inequalities beyond just the kind of direct, parameters of healthcare finance.
On the back of that, Nigel, just sort of, it's inspiring when you start talking about things like that, and you talk about, your heritage or whatever. I found out on Friday that I was looking at our latest Health Inequalities newsletter. So they're about to publish like an annual report. So it's in draft at the moment. But one of the stats that stuck out on there for me was also one of the achievements that STW had done was about targeted screening for prostate cancer for Black men aged over 40, twice as likely to get prostate cancer. Now, that's me. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't been doing the HIFF role. I wouldn't have, yes, I would be inquisitive off the back of that presentation. I'd have gone and looked. But because I'm part of groups and part of meetings where this is spoken about, something like that is just horrifying, isn't it? Like, why is that? Now, there might be something, I'm no clinical expert, obviously. There might be something to do with genetics or something like that there's a gene. It could be something like that. But surely, in this day and age, with preventative measures and screening tools and, all that we've actually got access to, as long as that community is aware of those, then surely that's something we can do something about. It's absolutely got to be, hasn't it, in this day and age? It's just being aware, isn't it? Being able to do those targeted pieces of work to that targeted group of people is really, really key, because without that, there might be people who aren't aware of those things that are available to them. And that is then an absolute crying shame, isn't it?
It is. You're absolutely right. And they affect all types of communities. You're absolutely right about the Black men. South Asian men also have a high propensity for prostate cancer, and it may elements of that might be genetic. There's also something about probably those communities not being aware of that risk, and probably they're not taking action to lots of communities have a different relationship with health services. And that's part of the challenge we have to tackle with health inequalities. We all don't engage with health services in exactly the same way, which is why outreach has become so important. But you've raised a very good point. And there's so many more that we're learning about. It's only when we get into the data and we look at some of the relationships, we're realizing that, there are relationships between women and men, between different racial groups, between different kind of groups of sexual orientation, of all sorts, and I guess it's imperative on us to be able to make sense of, to be inquisitive enough, as you've just identified, to be able to look for phenomenon that might be hidden in what we're doing, understand them, and then I guess to some extent make a decision about prioritizing some action against these. There may be some that we can't do anything about at the immediate in the short term, but at least knowing about them is helpful.
That's it. I think it's just highlighting them, isn't it, as well?
Absolutely.
And it can be like a daft conversation at the weekend with a family member who doesn't know but might know somebody. Oh, did you know this? Was applicable to yourself. We can do something preventative to help steer you away from being one of those statistics. So it's those random conversations that you have as well, isn't it? It isn't just the focused stuff in work while you're at work in those specific meetings. It's other conversations around that we can all have if you've got that awareness.
Yeah, absolutely right. It. Yeah, because how do you make it real? And sometimes we think it's about the big actions or the big interventions, but if you can kind of embed that into your kind of domestic life as well, that you become a champion, not just in the 8-10 hours or how many hours you work during, per day at work, but it becomes, you're 24 hours thinking about the opportunities of addressing health inequalities in whichever way they exist. Then sometimes there's a whole sequence of small actions that make the revolution rather than just the one or two big things. So
yeah, definitely. And I think that's the thing, isn't it, as well? And there are certain sort of headlines that you hear in terms of health inequalities that tend to get, everybody's aware of certain diseases, certain inequalities, but there are some others that people aren't so keen to talk about, and it's highlighted, like homelessness. It's just bringing those to the forefront as well, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think if we have that kind of empathy for others, then that kind of leads us into that health inequality space. We don't just make it numerical and ignore the people, which are part of the numbers. And I think we have a duty as finance professionals to be able to do that. I mean, everyone thinks, who isn't an accountant, thinks our job is just about numbers, but it's really about principles, values, and data and interpretation of that. And health inequalities isn't remotely removed from that. That should be parcel of that suite of tools that we have.
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to ask you both about that. When people kind of ask me what's your job, I often say that I work looking at how NHS finance can help to reduce health inequalities, and people are often very interested in that. Or sometimes they say, "Oh, that's a bit weird. I don't really see those two things as linked in any way. NHS finance and health inequalities. What's that all about then?" As people who are really a lot closer in to the action than I am, what do you think is the finance role in helping to reduce health inequalities? What practically can people do who are working in finance to help reduce health inequalities?
So I think it is not just about balancing the budget, because you could balance the budget and the direction of resources is skewed towards those who are least deprived away from those who are more deprived. We are, and given the kind of, I'd like to think we're in a democratic kind of egalitarian type society, then I think it's about us supporting those who are in probably a less fortunate or less advantageous position than we are. And it's all relative. But I think that's what it should be about. And therefore, that should be at the heart of the way that we look at resource allocation. So it's not just about balancing the budget, because you could balance the budget and still the use of resources aren't optimum. It's about how we use those resources. So we've been trying to do some work around looking at where spend is currently deployed, and is that deployed in a way that we would accept as partners. So are we spending a disproportionate amount of our resource on elderly compared to children, or does it look fine? What about investment in between men and women? How does that look? We don't have answers in their own right, and some might come by way of, if we had the ability to compare ourselves against other places, you kind of get a feel for. It's hard to measure something when you're measuring it in isolation, and sometimes you need that comparativeness. But I think it's about us as finance, not just to look at the bottom line, but to understand what's inherent in that bottom line, and to raise some of the questions and to prompt some of the considerations that we might not have done, because the bottom line is the answer that we're most concerned about.
That's really about understanding the broader data, isn't it?
Yes.
So understanding about need, but also about costs and how
Absolutely.
that looks across the population. Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Wendy, what do you think in terms of how finance can help?
Yeah, so obviously echo everything that Nigel has just said, but I'm just thinking in terms of this podcast, and maybe there are finance people listening to it who aren't in roles where they're privy to, that's part of their day work, where they're not at that cutting edge of making those decisions or looking at that in that detail. I'm just thinking, for me personally as well, I think a lot of it is just about, we've all got a responsibility, as Nigel said earlier, to be aware of it and to understand how it's impacting on our populations. So yes, we work in finance, and yes, we are predominantly obviously number-based and balancing the books, but it is about that whole appreciating what we do for our population and how that drives. So something as simple as signposting somebody, if an allocation is coming to the ICB and somebody is saying, we've bid for a pot of money, we've had note from NHS England that we've received that we've been successful and we're going to get this pot of money. It's sort of locating that. So they would come to finance to say, oh yes, this is a pot of money that we've bid for, been successful. Where is that in my budget? Well, when the allocations come in STW, we distribute them out at a point in time, but obviously we need to know who's put the bid in, and the communication isn't always, we don't always get told that an allocation is coming in for a specific person or a specific purpose. So it's about signposting people to that as well. So we can say, oh, actually, yes, this pot of money, yes, I can see that's coming on the monthly allocations. Yeah, we've got it. Tell us where you would like it put in terms of cost centre, so the practical bit, and do that. So that's like a practical thing that anybody can get involved in and do. So all the management accountants out there, have budget holder meetings. So having those conversations in budget holder meetings if they're waiting for allocations to come in. It's a very simple thing, but actually it's something that I've had feedback that, we know we come to you, we'll always get an answer. If you don't know, you find out and you come back to us. So it's doing that sort of inquisitive work again of, okay, you said the allocation's coming in. Let's have a look. Have we had it? Yes or no? Chasing it if we haven't. And that means a lot to the commissioners and to the people who are working with those funds. I think another thing in terms of finance is when we have business case forms, obviously there's finance sections in there, Also, there are establishment control forms which have finance sections in. We have allocations approval forms, so that has a finance section in. But within each of those finance sections, there is a bit about health inequalities as well, about what is this post, what is this allocation, what is this particular business case around, how is it going to help improve, what health inequalities is it going to look at, and how is it going to help improve. So I think as a finance individual sat in a team, I think it's very easy to say, maybe you're not that close to it and does it really impact on me? Well, actually, yes, it does. It impacts on everybody. It's what we're here to do. It's our fundamental job. Part of our role is to understand where our money's going and what it's doing and seeing that output as well. And we're part of a much bigger machine. It's not just around the finance or, it's an organisational thing. So, yeah, I think there's plenty people can do.
No, I totally agree with that. If I can just kind of interject there, I think how we translate it. I guess our role as the finance fellows is how we translate it into making it a real part of everyone's job. So it isn't just a section or a box or something. It's an integral part of it. I think you're absolutely right. I think the other thing that we can do just on when you mentioned about business cases is probably challenge the whole kind of business case, the way it's constructed, and work with our commissioners and fanners and clinical and non-clinical colleagues to kind of hold ourselves accountable for what's been delivered. So it's not just about spending the money; it's about what value it's brought, and how do we measure the value it's brought? Is spending the money exactly the same, whether regardless of what member of the public or what patient it's being spent on, or is there a different value that would confer to it if it was a patient who was from a least deprived cohort compared with one from a more deprived cohort? And I guess they might feel like nuances at this stage, but I think increasingly that's the kind of space that we as finance people need to be able to get into, both in terms of our kind of understanding and how we see things, but also having those discussions with non-finance colleagues about and supporting them in that kind of decision making.
Yeah.
The HFMA advocates for the inclusion of health inequalities in business cases, and we've got some guidance on that. Not just for business cases which are about health inequalities, where that's the whole purpose. It makes sense that features large in there, but also for other business cases where it might have an accidental knock-on effect on health inequalities, which might be for the better, it might be for the worse. But if you bring it out at that business case stage and start thinking about it and talking about it, it's much more likely that you can sway it towards for the better rather than for the worse.
It's that whole awareness thing again, isn't it then, that people are being made to think about it slightly differently to maybe how we have done in the past, and just having that at the forefront of people's minds.
And it's also a good way of actually testing whether our interventions, I know there are different delivery time frames or impact time scales, but are they actually having the impact on the populations that we would want them to have? And our interventions, sometimes too many interventions, a plurality of interventions just get in the way of each other and they don't tend to have the desired impact. So there's something around us, I think, as finance professionals leading the kind of continuous review about, are we doing things in the most effective way for the benefit of those people that we would want them to be targeted towards? So
keeping track and monitoring things rather than just
Absolutely.
a kind of been and gone type approach.
Yes.
I wondered, so the programme, the Health Inequalities Finance Fellows programme, it's got lots of different elements to it. There's our monthly network meetings where we have external speakers in. There's events run by NHS England where you get a chance to meet the wider cohort of Core 20 Plus ambassadors. And then there's training from the NHS School of Change Agents and lots of other things that are available to finance fellows. I wonder, which part of the programme have you personally found the most interesting and the most useful?
So for me, Emily, it's the monthly meeting one. In terms of I've been to a few of the bigger Core 20 Plus webinars. I haven't been to a great deal, I'll be honest with you. But in terms of the monthly meeting that we have as a group of health inequality finance fellows, for me, that's been really, really key. So I think initially at the start of this, whilst now we're, 6-9 months down the line, I can understand my role better now. At the beginning, I'll be quite honest, I felt like completely out of my depth because we went on these monthly meetings and there were some really great presentations of things from other finance associates who were doing stuff that I was just like, I wouldn't even know where to start with any of that. I'm not a data analyst, but they were heavily involved in certain projects. But again, it was that sparks your inquisitiveness then. So, we had one very early on about a dashboard that somebody had built that you were able to drill down to sort of minute detail in terms of a specific cohort, an age group, ethnicity, sex, whatever. And so I went back and asked in my organisation, I haven't heard that anything's going on like this, but it absolutely was. It's just because I hadn't asked the question. It isn't out there and fully built yet. So it wasn't sort of promoted as such. And I guess unless you worked particularly in that field, you probably weren't going to know that was going to happen. That was being underway. So I think those monthly meetings for me were real eye-openers. And I think that it gives you that chance, doesn't it, to feel that, I guess you can make that difference as well. You're not alone. And you're not alone there thinking, oh, my days, I don't know about any of that. I don't think I'd be able to present anything at one of those monthly meetings because I don't feel like I've particularly done anything, exceptional or in a projecty type of way that other than the signposting. So I think I'm going to use the signpost thing as my case study. But I think so at the start, I think I felt, say, a little out of my depth and am I really, do I deserve to be here when these people are doing these really great pieces of work and I'm not part of any of those in my organisation, which is fine, it's just that it hasn't sort of felt that way. But it isn't about that, is it? But being aware of them, absolutely, is that whole inquisitive nature thing back again. So it takes you back to your own organisations, you ask those questions. The recent one that we had around the primary care tool that had been built for allocating allocations that come in through the year for primary care. So rather than doing it on a population basis or a head count, that whole tool, I took that back to the organisation, shared with primary care colleagues and finance colleagues. So it's things like that. It's that pinching with pride. I like that term. So it's being able to do that and being part of that network as well. And, I don't feel like in those meetings that you can't ask anything. I'm probably a bit reluctant to say something sometimes because I don't feel like I'm doing things that are as grand as other people. But I love those meetings. They're the highlight of my month, going to those.
Oh, lovely.
So I think they're the ones that have really helped me in my journey, definitely.
I'd agree entirely with that.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Especially the parts about, the kind of imposter syndrome. When you start, you come together, it's hard to kind of gauge, whether the things that you're doing, and they may sound quite, kind of operational and kind of, but they're houses, and fact skyscrapers are built with individual bricks. Or steel, individual parts of steel, but you get the analogy I'm trying to get at.
We're not engineers, and
I think, and so what you might be seeing is just one solitary brick might be a fundamental part of what's being built. So I think we need each other to kind of remember that, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, we also share those case studies Emily shared. We had those at the beginning, didn't we, anyway? But those are really interesting as well. It's interesting to see what's going on in other parts of the country as well, like I say, across the board, what's going on. And also, I think I felt being from a commissioning organisation as opposed to a provider that we'd always be that one step away or feel like we're one step away because we aren't those going out and doing those health checks, going out and doing those targeted pieces of work. However, we have to remind ourselves that actually we're the conduit that's happened, that's made that happen. So I did. So it's interesting to see for me what other ICBs we're doing as well and how other ICB finance colleagues were getting involved.
Yeah, and I guess we should be commissioning for health inequality, shouldn't we? That should be an integral part of our commissioning strategy.
Yes, yeah. Definitely.
So similar for me would be the monthly meetings. I mean, there was of the suite you mentioned at the start, Emily, there's one element. I think the third element's probably the one I've interacted with the least at this stage. Probably we're still kind of on the diet of just getting to solids. We're not quite at solids yet, so we're still having a bit of a semi-solid diet. So the monthly meetings and the presentations have been instrumental. Some of the debate that happens during those and the questions that are asked is a really great way of spreading and, dare I say, kind of managing each other's kind of expectations and perspectives on things. And it's great to have a perspective challenged by a question that somebody else raised. I thought, oh, gosh, I never really thought about that. And we probably would never get into that space by just having a presentation where we didn't have the ability to ask questions and debate and, even things which felt concerning to us as individuals. Sometimes we find answers that, in those forums that we hadn't really thought of or a slightly different perspective on things. And it's great to be able to take that back into, our, as part and parcel of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I've really welcomed those. And a great way of seeing how people have tackled it, because there is no singular way of tackling health inequalities. In some cases, you might start macro and drill down. In other cases, you start micro and you build up. But seeing all of these and seeing some of the areas, one of the things we'll never run out of are aspects where health inequalities is an issue. It's just part and parcel of what health services. I do think we've got a really great role. I agree with you about the directness of relationship that provider colleagues have. But I think in the commissioning ICB kind of organizations, we have probably that, not only that commissioning perspective, but we have that partnership with others where we really get into the wider determinants of health space. And I think that's equally as interesting. We can influence, work with our partners to influence, strategies or interventions, from a commissioning framework, and then do something quite similarly in partners to ensure that we've got complementary kind of activities that would further boost whatever investment there is targeting those particular cohorts.
Yeah, because I guess it's challenging, isn't it? It's challenging the way things have been commissioned, like we said before, isn't it? It's not commissioning things the way we've always commissioned things.
Absolutely.
It's making some difficult decisions sometimes that may take money away from a certain cohort that have traditionally had that, but actually that, shake that whole thing up. So it's challenging those decisions, isn't it? And looking at it a bit objectively, perhaps from an integrated commissioning board aspect, looking at it, objectively. So when you aren't the people doing the delivering, and that's somebody's job, that's probably what, could be how they've always done that particular service. So being able to make those changes and influence those changes is absolutely key, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we've also got, this is going to sound quite idealistic, but we've got a really great opportunity to be part of the legacy of the NHS where it stands, being able to do things that could improve the life expectancy of populations is, who wouldn't want to be part of that? It's hard work and it's very, very complex and there are no immediate returns, but just to be part of, a movement or a vehicle or, part of a professional group that does that contributes to that, I think is a tremendous opportunity.
It is. It's one of those things, isn't it, that we might not see the results for many years to come. So,
absolutely.
But like you say, knowing you've been part of that at the outset is a good feeling, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Really
and we will be the recipients. We're the beneficiaries, or
good
if not
point.
us, our children or our children's children.
Absolutely.
So, we're also direct kind of customers of what we do. So, yeah. It's a source of pressure as well, but it's a great thing to get involved in.
I love that. Who would not want to be part of that? That's the quote. Excellent.
Yeah.
We've mentioned a little bit, touched on this already. There's, as part of the programme, there's a case study. So Health Inequalities Finance Fellows are asked to write up case studies on work that has to do with health inequalities that's happening in their organisation or their system. Now, Wendy's mentioned that she's thinking of talking about some of the signposting work she's done, which sounds really, really interesting, actually. So it's good to hear a little bit of detail about that. Nigel, I wonder, have you got anything in mind that you were planning to write about in your case study?
We've got together, through our ICB's Director of Public Health, we've got together a whole framework of, not quite a meeting forum, I guess we call it, where we bring the core 20 plus ambassadors and the Health Inequality Finance Fellows and other kind of, partners who would be involved in that space, from place DPHs and, voluntary sector organizations, etc. We brought together that into a regular meeting, Population Health Academy, that's what it's called. And so while it's about population health, obviously health inequalities is quite a fundamental part of that. I've gone with my, I'd call it my area of interest and passion, and that's around the use of drugs of dependencies, particularly where we see a lot of the data proves that, or points to the fact that there's a greater incidence of prescription amongst the more challenged communities. And we know that drugs of dependency has that knock-on impact into health and other wider dependency. So it's an area where we've got health practice could lead to not failings, but it could impact adversely in other areas like education and employment. And usually we look at it the other way. We look at how could education, housing, employment impact on health. Well, this is one area where we can look at it the other way. And it's a difficult nut to crack, but I just think rather than put it in the too hard box, we should start to do things which, again, help us understand the phenomenon in a different way, in a bit more detail. And it might give us a different route into leading in how we tackle it. So yeah, it's looking at the impact of prescribing drugs of dependency, and it's a specific cohort of drugs, and particularly on populations who are more challenged than others.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, look forward to reading that one,
Thank
Nigel.
you.
That will be really, really good. We'll wrap up in a moment. If either of you got any last comments or thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
I think I'd just like to, just take the opportunity to say to anybody who's listening to this who works in finance, just to get involved, to be involved. I'm not sure if the HIFF programme is continuing next year, but whether it is or isn't, you can still be involved as a Core 20 ambassador, can't you? And still have, play the same role that we've played this 12 months. And I think sort of from the system where I work in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, it's a very challenged system. So we get a lot of bad press, but sort of it makes me really proud for the things that we do that you wouldn't necessarily get to find out about unless you've been involved in something like this. So, we've done over 40 measurable things within actions within the ICB to tackle health inequalities. We've come a really long way with things that don't get highlighted anywhere else. So, it's such a shame. Like everyone's always very quick and willing to share the bad news. Nobody wants to celebrate the good news. And there's so much good news going on in Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. It makes me quite upset actually that people don't get to hear about it. And I think the fact that we've managed to sustain and get implemented as part of our structure in the ICB, a health inequalities team now, a substantive team that's more than just a couple of people is absolutely fantastic, and they're so dedicated and so passionate. And what you were just talking, Nigel, about a group that you have within your organisation. So we have a similar group within STW. So we've got provider colleagues on there, local authority, primary care network colleagues, and they're all so enthused about what they do. And it's infectious. And I think when you're working day to day, and it is a hard environment to work in sometimes, I think you need those little nuggets of gold to keep you going, don't you? And we've got plenty of those in STW. They're just not highlighted often enough, in my opinion. So I think to be part of that just makes you feel better and more valued within your role as well. That might sound a bit daft, but that's how it makes me feel. It makes me proud to be there.
I'd even say, just kind of aligned to that, is the role that, I mean, we're in at a time where resources are at a premium. The NHS has to rescale its expenditure into a more affordable envelope. And for me, it's about us finance playing a key role in ensuring we make the least worst decisions as part of that. How do we ensure that as part of that rescaling into a more affordable envelope, we don't impact those who are more needing the worst. And it's a risk because some of them, we don't know all of them are needing. Some of that need hasn't quite surfaced yet. For me, I think that's a key part of what we do. Health inequality still feels a little bit extracurricular. It's kind of like, it's becoming more and more central core part of the role of NHS, and particularly NHS finance. But it still feels a little bit extracurricular where people go into a health inequality space. I think our role as champions is to make that mainstream. And how do we make it mainstream at a time when people go, well, yeah, but there isn't any more money, but we still got the how many billions that we've got. It's just about pivoting and about sensible and redeployment. And I think we need to be at the heart of that. And I think success is when we are the champions. We are the only champions of health inequality in an NHS or partnership discussions, that everybody is talking about health inequalities, and it's a fundamental. It's almost like that, the writing on that stick of rock. It's fundamental and it's core to everything that we talk about, everything that we do. And it feels like there's quite a journey to get from where we are now to where we need to be. But I think us starting with being the guinea pigs of the Health Inequalities Finance Fellows Program, I think is a step in the right direction to achieve that. Hopefully you've got the right guinea pigs, is what I'd say.
It's down on paper, isn't it, that health inequalities is a core part of ICBs, but it's making that happen in practice and pushing that cultural change. Really important. Thank you so much, Nigel and Wendy. That's been a really, really interesting conversation. Always gives me a boost talking to you and to the other Health Inequalities Finance Fellows. I think that this is a group with potential to have a huge impact in the years to come. In terms of what's next for the HFMA Health Inequalities Finance Fellows, do look out for our case studies, which we will promote as and when they're available. Our current cohort comes to an end in November, at which point we switch across to an alumni network. We hope to run a new cohort every 2 years, which means recruiting our next cohort of Health Inequalities Finance Fellows in summer 2025, ready to start in the autumn. If this feels like a long time to wait, then I have a couple of suggestions for you. The first is that you might like to come along to the HFMA Health Inequalities Conference, which is due to take place in Birmingham on the 6th of November. And I know that we've got quite a few finance fellows coming along to that. And my second suggestion is that you might like to complete some HFMA e-learning on health inequalities. This is free to NHS staff, and you can find it through the Health Inequalities page of the HFMA website, or by searching through the HFMA bite-sized courses, either on ESR or on the HFMA website. The titles of the relevant modules are An Introduction to Health Inequalities for Finance, Using Data to Understand Health Inequalities, Allocating Resources to Address Health Inequalities, and finally, Reflecting Health Inequalities in Your Business Case. Thank you for listening to HFMA Talk. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to keep up to date with future episodes.